welcome and thanks for dialing in for this update on the fence specifications for NRCS Utah. Can everybody see the Word document, the construction specification on the Skype meeting? Okay, good. So, in short, what happened here was we, and by we I mean the two area conservationists for range. That's Chet in the north and Lee in the area south, and myself undertook a long time ago. I want to say about 6 months to make some updates and improvements to the fence spec sheet, which I'm going to go over today as well, and that translated into updating and improving the construction specs for fencing, and that's all finished now. We've had several iterations back and forth, and there's some small changes, there's some significant changes, and what I'd like to do here, well, first let me tell you one of the significant changes is in the construction specification. Now, in Utah, I think fence is a unique practice because it has a construction specification that's separate from the standard and separate from the spec sheet, and it's like all the engineering practices have this construction specification document, but fence is not an engineering practice. But it's similar enough that we went ahead and went this way and built a document called a construction specification. Formerly, all the different types of fence were contained in one construction specification. So if you wanted to give the construction spec to a landowner who was only considering one kind of fence, they had to wade through the whole thing to get what they wanted, and it was actually a little convoluted how it was written. So one thing we did was separate out all the different types of fence so that each different type of fence has its own construction spec now. What I'd like to do is present to you the construction spec for standard fencing, and without going into too much detail about all the changes that were made, I'd just like to cover the whole thing as a review for those of you who are familiar, and some of you might not have even, who are newer, might not have been that familiar with the old one. So I'm just going to present this whole thing, and then I'll go into the other construction specs for all the different kinds of fence, and we'll just outline the differences between those and the standard fence construction spec, and then lastly I'll go over the changes that we made in the spec sheet. So okay, so the scope of this construction spec is standard barbed wire fence. In the materials section, it says all the materials shall be new and of a quality that is commonly used for ranch fences. But then it says the following used materials are permissible. Any used materials will be approved by the planner or technician prior to installation. So you've got drill stem pipe, railroad ties, and telephone poles can be used as posts if they're whole, sound, and free from decay. Because those three items, they make great fence material, but it's pretty hard to find new ones. You know, literally new material there. And Typically, the used drill stem, the used railroad ties, the used telephone poles are perfectly adequate for building fence. So that is the exception to the new materials requirement. Installation, and this is one that gets overlooked a lot. The fence shall be installed as detailed on drawings and maps. Yes, we have a spec sheet for fence, but precisely where the different aspects of the fence go should be detailed on a drawing or map. Definitely as a minimum on the conservation plan map. And you may need to have something that's even more detailed than that, showing the location of features like where the fence braces go, where the gates are going to go, where the tie downs need to be, etc. So items and work and construction details. This is a little clause that's in all of them about special fences. Oftentimes people come up with situations where you need to build a fence that really doesn't fit any of these general fence types that we have construction specs for. And that's common. And in this part of the construction spec, we say those designs, you can develop them on a case-by-case basis, and you submit them to the state resource conservationist for approval. That way, it's not a whole big thing. It's not a variance, because variance implies a very specific procedure to get that involves national headquarters, which we don't want to have to go through. So here we're saying if you need to build a weird fence, you can get permission from the SRC to do it, case-by-case basis. So the criteria part, this includes let-down fences as well as standard, this is barbed wire, 3, 4, 5 strand barbed wire, either regular fence or let-down fence, and they're for fences up to 42 inches tall. And you're going to have drawings as part of the specification, and we've included some drawings here on these construction spec sheets now. That's new. We'll get to them on the last pages. There's specifications here about the wire. I don't think there's any changes here. You need 13.5 gauge or larger, which means a larger gauge, which in gauges is a lower number. Or if it's high tensile, like the gaucho wire, it can be 15.5 gauge. And the smooth single strand high tensile can be 12.5 gauge. Only new wire will be used. Wire staples. This one is interesting and catches a lot of people off guard. It says staples shall not be galvanized. The reason for that is you want the staple to get a little coating of rust once you've driven it in, and that helps hold it in place. Let's see. Okay, line posts. So materials for line posts need to be treated, unless they're made of pitch pine, juniper, red cedar, or Osage orange, which we don't get a lot of in Utah. We do use a lot of juniper posts in Utah. They're an exception. They do not need to be treated, but any of the other wood posts, you'll see them treated with their green colored preservative. We don't want to put untreated posts in. They rot too fast. And the wooden ones need to be at least 4 inches nominal diameter inside the bark. T-posts need a minimum weight of 1.33 pounds per foot of length. There are some cheap substandard, lightweight T-posts out there that we don't want to use in our fences. They are a little cheaper. Most of the, this 1.33 pounds per foot is your standard T-post weight. As far as depth, the line posts need to be put in 24 inches deep, or the steel posts can be in 18 inches minimum. If it's sandy textured soils, we want them a little deeper. The maximum spacing between line posts on a standard fence is 16.5 feet. Now the brace posts, if you're going to use steel like the drill stem pipe, that needs to be big enough that it's 2.84 pounds per foot of length. I think that's a 3-inch drill stem. If you're going to use steel, the cross braces need to be welded in place, and the steel needs to be painted or galvanized. And if you're going to use steel, they get set in concrete. They don't just get driven or buried. They get set in concrete a minimum of 24 inches. So that's what a steel brace section looks like. If you're going to use wooden brace posts, you can use all the same materials that you had in line posts, but on the brace posts we want a nominal diameter of 6 inches inside the bark. This is the place where railroad ties and telephone poles typically get used, is for the brace posts, because they're big size, exceptional strength, and ability to last a long time. So the brace posts get set in at least 30 inches, except the steel brace posts can be set in concrete to 24. Now the cross braces on the brace sections, they're wood material, 3 3/4 inch minimum diameter, so that's like a dimensional lumber 4x4, so a treated 4x4 is a good cross brace. Steel pipe 2.5 inch minimum diameter can be used here. And the wooden cross braces get set attached to the posts with 40 penny ring shanks or 5/16 lag bolts or something equivalent to that. There's a structure called a jack leg. Oh, I wish I had a picture of one in here. I don't think there is a picture of one, but a jack leg is just where you lean a post up against another post to push against it, and it's just set into the soil. Those are not substitutes for braces. I get this one a lot. I used to, about the prefabricated metal brace panels like Easy Fence, what have you. You can set them in with steel posts. People want to use these in lieu of a proper brace panel made out of wood posts. These are allowable, but only if there's a situation where that is preventing you from building a proper brace. And if you do put these in, we're kind of specifying a certain way. You want to use 2 steel posts on either end. You want them pounded in at least 2 feet deep, back to back. And there's a right way and a wrong way to install these metal brace panels. And if you're using these, the maximum length between them is 660 feet, where on a regular brace it's a 1/4 mile, it's 1320. Okay, bracing and alignment. This is one that throws a lot of people off. Bracing and putting in a brace section is required every time there's a corner, every time there's a gate, anytime you change direction in the fence. You can't have a subtle direction change in a fence of just a couple degrees or 5 degrees or 10 degrees without putting in a brace panel. It's straight sections between braces. That goes a long way to the life and the strength of the fence if you build them that way. Also, vertical changes. Anytime that there's an abrupt change going uphill or downhill or at the crest of a slope or a hill, that needs a brace as well. This is one reason it's so important to have a drawing or a map that is going to detail the location of where the braces are going to be. The maximum distance that you can have between braces in a fence is not to exceed 1320 feet. So just a long straight section, you at least need a brace to stretch to every quarter of a mile. The bracing shall be designed to provide solid anchorage for wire stretching. That's the main purpose of a brace, is to have a place where you can stretch wire to. You can have 2, 3, or 5 post H braces. We do have some drawings for those. We have cross braces and tension members of wire incorporated in all the brace panels. I'll explain that in a drawing in a minute. And there's some details there about how to build the tension members with at least 4 complete loops of smooth wire twisted up. Another key thing here about the braces, the last sentence here, it says the brace panels shall maintain a 2-to-1 ratio of brace length to height of the top wire. For example, a 42-inch high fence requires an 84-inch or 7-foot minimum brace length. So we don't want little stubby braces that are only 4 foot long. Okay, but the maximum length of a brace shall be 10 feet. Jack legs, you can't build jack legs. Sometimes they are useful at the end of a brace, and they should supplement but not replace the fence braces. Gates. You should specify the number of gates, the location of the gates, and the material you're going to use. It says if you're going to build them out of wood, you should use 2-inch or larger dimensional lumber, 3-inch or larger poles. Not real picky about the gates here, not a lot of details. You could go into a lot of detail about how to build a gate, but if you need that kind of detail, we refer to a book called Fences that was published by I think the Forest Service and the Society for Range Management. That's referred to in this construction spec, and it's on the ePhotog, and it is full of all kinds of details about how to build some of these things. Cattle guards, especially if it's a government road, they need to be installed with blessing and however the local transportation road department wants it. Anchoring. Okay, so this is where the fence hits low spots, and when you stretch the wire, it wants to pull the posts up out of the ground, and it will unless you use anchoring. And on those low spots, you want a weight or a dead man anchor that's equivalent to a 12 by 12 by 12 inch concrete block. So you can use rocks, you can use baskets full of rocks, or big boulders, something that is going to hold that fence down and prevent that from pulling up the posts. Stays, are required unless the fence is less than 10-foot spacing on the line posts. If it's more than 10-foot spacing, you're going to need some stays. Stays can be the twisty wire ones. If you use those, they shouldn't hit the ground when they're twisted in all the way, so whatever length you need to do that. Wood stays, if you use those, should be at least 1.5 inches diameter. Let-down fences have a lot of wooden stays in them. The maximum spacing of stays, wooden stays, in a let-down fence is 5'6" So you'd need at least 2 stays in between a fence that has a 16.5-foot post spacing. Plus, you'd need 2 more stays right at the posts. Special note there about let-down fences, and in the fence publication, that's been there for a long time. The fence height. This can be a contentious issue. As far as the height with the brace posts, you want the top wire to be at least within 3 inches of the top of the brace posts, and 1 inch below the top of the line posts, minimum. And the specs in here are for fences that are up to 60 inches tall. However, for big game passage, here's a recommended spacing for 3 and 4 wire fences that are maximum of 42 inches tall, with a minimum spacing of 10 inches between the top 2 wires. 12 inches if you can get it. So if it is necessary to build a fence higher than 42 inches, such designs will be developed on a case-by-case basis and submitted to the Area Resource Conservationist for approval. So that's a new thing. If your fence design is higher than 42 inches, you will need either Chet or Lee to approve that design. In pronghorn antelope country, always allow 12 inches between the top wire and the next lower one, and keep it as low as feasible. And the bottom wire needs to be smooth and at least 16 inches off the ground. So one thing you can consider for areas of high big game traffic are pole fences, laydown fences, PVC top rails, and I think there's 2 different wildlife friendly fence guideline books in the tech guide with other tips and tricks about how to make fences wildlife friendly. One of those is from Montana, one of those is from, I think, Wyoming. Both have great ideas. Lastly, fence marking for visibility. So this is for everything, really. It's not just for sage grouse, but it can improve the safety of a fence for livestock, wildlife, people. The top wire and a midsection wire nearest to the center shall be marked by hanging 3-inch section of vinyl undersill trim. Markers will be spaced 4 feet apart and staggered between the top and center row. Both dark and light colors will be used to ensure visibility during all seasons. So that's a little safety thing you can put in places where you need it. Let's see here. Here's the drawings that we've included. These are older drawings, but you can see the details here for the top one there. That's a 3-post H-brace. That would be for a corner. The next one down is a 2-post H-brace, line brace. That's just for a straight section. Gate braces, here on the bottom of that page. Here's a detail of just a basic section of a wood and steel post, 3-wire and 4-wire fence, wire stay example, wood stay example, how to incorporate a tree. Here's some examples of tie downs with the rocks that we were talking about. Here's an example of a letdown fence. And any questions to this point? Can everybody still hear me? Okay, good, thank you. Just checking, because at some point I just need that. Okay, so that's the specs for pole fences, standard fences. Can you guys see the specs for pole fences now? With the red text? Okay, I am going to pull a little trick here. Okay. How about now? Okay, pole and timber fences. So here's something that you build. This is a wildlife friendly kind of fence for sure, with no wire on it. It usually lets things pass over it or through it with ease. It's also pretty stable. This is a great thing to use, like if you're fencing around a spring. You want wildlife to be able to get in and out. You want it to be super strong and not let the livestock in. So the red text in here is the things that are different between this construction spec and the one for standard fences. So as far as poles go, poles can be milled lumber or round poles, such as lodgepole pine. So we can have square or rectangle shaped lumber here for the pole fences, timber fences. And in fact, you can use buck fences. What bucks are is instead of setting a post in the ground in a post hole, you make a little bipod or tripod of post material, and then you can stretch wire or poles in between them. We want at least 4-inch nominal diameter for the poles. Bucks, yeah, bucks are an alternative to setting posts that does not require setting into a post hole. So you might run into situations where that is what you need to do. If you use posts, they need to be a minimum of 5 inches nominal diameter. The maximum spacing between posts in a pole or timber fence is 10 feet. If you use gates, you do need to set a post. You cannot attach gates to bucks. And so the fence height to allow big game passage, that would go up to 38 inches for the top pole in this example. And if it's in antelope country, you want the bottom wire to, if there's wire incorporated, to be smooth and at least 16 inches off the ground. And that's all there is to pole fences. Any questions about the pole and timber fences? Okay, I'm going to go on to woven wire fences. These are very much like the standard fence. There, can you see the woven wire? Okay, so you see the reason we split these out into separate documents is so that if you wanted to give these to a landowner to help build, this would not be in lieu of a spec sheet at all. But you don't have to wade through every kind of fencing. If you know what kind of fence you want, you can just have one document. That's why this was done. So one thing about woven wire fences, they present significant challenges for several wildlife species, and you should only choose a woven wire fence when no other feasible alternative exists. In other words, woven wire fences are for controlling sheep and goats. It's not just because I like one. Okay, so there has to be a literal purpose for choosing a woven wire fence, and it's typically because sheep and goats. So there's some details there about the gauges and sizes of woven wire, and we have granted exceptions to this before, but this is the standard woven wire that's out there being described. Other than that, it's mostly like the standard fence spec until you get down here to the big game passage part, and there's some different scenarios described here for at least making the height feasible so that big game can jump over it easily. One of them is using a 39-inch wide net, and one of them is using a 32-inch wide net. Typically, there's a barbed wire on top, strung on top of the net wire for the very top piece. And that's all there is to the net wire fences. Any questions on those? Moving on to the permanent power fences. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the reasons that net wire is less wildlife friendly. I mean, you got a 39-inch net. Where are you going to put your barbed wire? It's not optimal. You know, if so you look at the bottom one, you've got more space there. You've got 8 inches between the top two barbs, and you're using 32-inch net. That might be a little more wildlife friendly, less prone to catch a leg with the big game that's crossing. So, okay. Yep. Okay. Permanent power fencing. Okay, permanent power fencing. As far as the post spacing and the bracing, it's very similar to building a standard fence. However, it's high tensile wire, and the tension on the wires in permanent power fence is typically tighter than on a standard fence, and so we want to beef up our braces for a permanent power fence, and you'll see that in some of the changes that we made in this construction spec. There is a publication, it's on the Photog, it's called Electric Fencing for Serious Grazers, that has a lot of great details about permanent electric fences in it. I think, well, I'm not even going to get into it, but electric fences are cool, especially in pasture situations. You are only going to use high tensile smooth wire in electric fences. That's the 12.5 gauge stuff, and you'd never ever use barbed wire or anything else in electric fences. The line posts, they can be the same kind that you put in a standard fence. You just have to put an insulator on them, either wood or steel. Or there's other options. They have fiberglass and polymer posts that do not require an extra insulator, that are perfectly acceptable for putting in permanent power fences. Depth in soil. The steel or fiberglass posts need about the same depth, 18 inches or 24 if it's sandy. And this is one thing that throws a lot of people off. Maximum spacing between line posts is 40 feet. So you can have a 40-foot space between your line posts, because that high tensile wire is stretched up so tight. Basically all the line posts are doing is keeping the wire up in the air. It doesn't have to provide a lot of strength. It's this kind of fence is more of a psychological barrier for sure than a literal barrier to livestock. So the brace posts we want in at least 3 feet deep to give them some extra strength. We're not going to be using any metal brace panels for permanent power fences, any of the prefab ones. And what other differences did we have here? Anytime you anchor in a low spot or a draw, you have to use insulated wires to do that, so it won't ground it out. Stays are not usually used, but there are some. If you wanted to put some stays in your 40-foot sections, they need to be non-conductive material. Power fences are probably one of the most wildlife friendly fences. Wildlife can squirt through these at any time. The wire is smooth and it's not gonna injure them at all. The babies can get through it. It's pretty good stuff for wildlife. There's some suggested wire spacings here for different kinds of livestock and for big game passage, depending on your situation. One thing that should be specified and emphasized in permanent power fences is the grounding. You need to have really good ground rods in really good moist soil spots wherever your energizers are to get a good strong charge going through the fence. So there's some details there about grounding. The energizers, there's some minimum requirements. You need at least 1,000 volts for cattle, 2,000 for sheep, 2,500 for big game dogs and coyotes at the farthest point from the energizer. And the pulse duration shall not exceed 0.3 milliseconds. That's not very long. And So most of your standard fence energizers are gonna conform to this, except the very cheapest, crappiest ones. Insulators can be porcelain, ceramic, plastic, or something equivalent when you're attaching to metal or wood posts. The wire tension here is specified where it wasn't on the standard fences. This needs to be at least 175 pounds per wire of tension. And there's actually ways to measure that in the field should it become necessary. But that's a really tight fence. Splices are going to be made with press-on sleeves or line clamps or line taps, whatever the manufacturers recommend. And that's it for permanent power fences. Any questions on that? Okay, we've got one more construction specification, and then we'll get into the spec sheet. This last construction spec is for a type of fence that nobody uses hardly. Getting there. Suspension fence. Suspension fence is basically a standard fence, standard barbed wire fence, but it's built with heavier duty braces and high tensile barbed wire, like gaucho wire, so that you can have greater spacing between your line posts, like a permanent power fence. Just picture a permanent power fence that's built out of barbed wire and is not electrified. So these are only good for long, straight, relatively flat areas. I've seen these on desert land and livestock. They're done to save money, really. It's less material cost and a little bit less labor cost. You put a lot of effort into building your braces, and the maximum spacing between line posts is 80 feet. So you build really strong braces, you put in high tensile wire, you stretch it real super tight, and then you need fewer line posts. So you can see why this saves a little bit of money. We're not going to use metal brace panels with these. We're not going to have any 2-post braces here. We're going to have 3-post and 5-post braces. We want the extra strong ones. And the stays need to be put in this fence. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of stays, maximum spacing of 15 feet on the stays. Other than that, it's, again, with the wire tension, no less than 175 pounds. Any question on suspension fences? Okay. I am going to move on to the spec sheet. So even with these construction specs, there's quite a range of possibilities for each of the different types of fence. We want to be able to specify and plan each individual fence in our plans and our contracts. So we took the existing fence spec sheet, which is in ePhotog. It's a Word document. It's still all there, and darn, I cannot remember all the changes that we made to this, but there were several. It still has the same look and feel. I think we might have rearranged and gave a little more space here for the grazing management description. But the idea was to cover all of the parts and sections in the construction specification and be able to specify here, okay, with all those options, what are you going to build on your fence? We added this checkbox right here as a reminder that you need to attach a map for the planned location of the gates and the braces, etc., to this construction or to this spec sheet. So it just runs through the fence materials that you need. What kind of wire are you putting? What gauge? What are the spacing of the wire? What's the height of the ground to the bottom wire? The ground to the top wire? What kind of posts you're going to put in? Spacing, the depth, the top diameter, the weight of the steel posts, all the details about the posts that you're going to use, so that nobody's wondering. I think we added this line for stays and fasteners, visibility markers. We added a line for those. We actually made quite a few changes to this. I think if you compared this to the old one, you'll see that some of the language is clearer and there's more details on this new one to fill out. Better organization. So on the second page, you've got your signature block, your conservation measures, and your certification block here, where you can both design and certify the fence here by documenting all these things and signing it when the project's done. So any questions on the spec sheet? Any questions about fences in general? Permanent power fence, we do. Temporaries, not yet. That's the only one that we didn't build yet. That's yet to come, and so for now we're, the temporary fencing for that's in the old construction spec is what we'll have to go by. But yeah, we need a temporary electric fence construction spec. And okay, that was Chelsea. And looks like Jed, are you on the phone as well? And oh, a bunch of you. Okay, good. Well, those things that I just presented to you and showed to you, the spec sheet and the new construction specs, are all in ePhotog and are live and active now. So that's all I had for you. If there aren't any more questions, then thanks for dialing in, and we'll see you next time.